Hello, lovelies. Come on in. We are journeying through God's Word today. We are in Genesis. I'm on Genesis 27 today. I have my Bible, I've got my notes, I've got my tea, and I've got some extra text that we'll pull out when we need it today. We start this chapter with the statement or the suggestion that Isaac is very ill and likely to die. In fact, his entire family thinks he's about to die, including Isaac himself. Now, he was likely somewhere around the age, I've seen commentaries sort of age him for this story at about 117, 137 years old, somewhere around in that direction. So it seems possible that he's nearing the end of his life. However, he doesn't actually die till he's 180. So I think that although everyone is thinking this is like end of days, that likely this is just an illness that overcame him. He became very ill for a short period of time, but then recovered because he goes to live quite a few more decades after this. Now, the reason this is significant is that everyone in his family, including himself, Isaac himself, thinks he is dying. And so it's important that he give his deathbed blessing or prophetic blessing over his children before he dies. And this is definitely a practice that we see throughout the Bible, but it was common practice in the area that Isaac is living in right now. So I want to pull from the archaeology and Bible history book just to give us a bit of depth in here. Archaeological light on oral blessings is found in the Nuzi tablets. These were around the 1500 to 1400 BC is their date range. And on one of these tablets, it shows an oral blessing in a patriarchal time had legal validity, even in a law court. This particular document recorded the lawsuit of a certain Tamarnia against his two brothers who contested the right of a younger brother to take a woman by the name of Zulu Ishtar as his wife. Tamara won the case and was awarded his bride because the court recognized the validity of his father's blessing, which Tamara reported in this way. My father, Hawaii, was sick and living in bed, and my father seized my hand and spoke to me. My older sons have taken wives, but thou hast not taken a wife, and I give Zulu Ishtar to thee as a wife. This text parallels this biblical passage and the biblical blessings like those of the patriarchs, in that it was an oral will with legal validity. It was made to a son by his father, and because he was dying, it adds actually extra weight. And so what we're going to see is that all the players involved in this story understand that if Isaac is passing away, the words that he speaks now as a blessing become legally binding, but also they would understand it to be spiritually binding to the God that they follow. So that might be a little outside of our understanding of what might happen on a deathbed declaration now, but we've got some archaeological findings that demonstrate to us that this was common practice at the time. So this story is setting up a blessing that is irrevocable. So let's get into it so we can make some more sense out of this. All right. When Isaac was old and his eyes were so weak that he could no longer see, he called Asa, his older son, and said to him, My son, here I am, he answered. And Isaac said, I am now an old man, don't know the day of my death. Now go get your weapons, your quiver and bow, and go out into the open country and hunt some wild game for me. Prepare me the kind of tasty food I like and bring it to me to eat, so that I may give you my blessing before I die. Isaac thinks he's going to die. I think it's interesting that this birthright is again being negotiated over food. I think that's rather interesting. Like Asa, Isaac has a passion for food. it's obvious from this story that Isaac is struggling with God's election. We've got in the past 2 chapters, first of all, in Genesis 25, verse 23, we've got the Lord telling Rebekah, the older will serve the younger. This declaration from even in utero that it would be Jacob who carries the blessing over Esau. Then we've got in chapter 20, at the end of 25 and into 26, several examples of how Esau is demonstrating, first of all, that he doesn't want the birthright. He's willing to negotiate or give it away for the cost of one meal. And 2, that he does not ascribe to the same belief system that Isaac and Rebekah, and of course going back, Abraham has, because he is now married outside of the covenant, married outside of the family that the Lord is wanting to bless. So Esau has made it several steps that demonstrate his unworthiness. We've got also the prenatal declaration or prophetic word. But Isaac is struggling with this. He wants this blessing to go to Esau. We saw this with Abraham. Abraham wanted the blessing to go to Ishmael. It was his first son. This was his firstborn, the one that was the first promise of a son. And yet God says, no, the blessing will go to Isaac. And here we've got the same thing happening. Isaac wants so desperately for this birthright, this promise, this blessing to go to Esau. But the Lord is going to ensure that it falls on Isaac. Verse 5. Rebekah intervenes. Now Rebekah was listening as Isaac spoke to his son Esau, and now Rebekah is getting worried. Rebekah understands the prophetic word spoken to her, over her. She received it. And the person who receives it usually carries it a little heavier than the one who heard about it, right? I'm sure you've noticed that in your life too. If you've heard directly from the Lord about something, you feel more passionate about it than the person you told about it. Same thing here for Rebekah. She is holding on to the prophetic blessing that God spoke over her children, but also she has been witnessing Esau's character. And as we see at the end of Genesis 26, verse 35, Esau marrying these Hittite girls were a source of grief. So she, in her mind, has settled 2 things. 1, this is God's will, and 2, Esau does not deserve this blessing. So she is determined to make God's blessings happen through human means. We are all guilty of that. We all do that. When Esau left for the open country to hunt for game and bring it back, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Look, I overheard your father say to your son Esau, 'Bring me some game and prepare me some tasty food to eat, so that I may give you my blessing in the presence of the Lord before I die. Now, my son, listen carefully and do what I tell you. Go to the flock and pick 2 choice young goats, so I can prepare some tasty food for your father just the way he likes it. Then give it to your father to eat, so that he may give you his blessing before he dies.'" And this is Rebekah's solution to the problem of Isaac having a blind eye towards Esau. Rebekah is going to try to create an opportunity for the blessing to fall to Jacob. It's interesting to note that the deception begins with Rebekah, but that Jacob carries it through. You see, Isaac asked specifically for a meal of wild game. He asked his son to go out and hunt down wild game. And here Rebekah is bringing in I'm assuming a goat from their own flock to prepare the meal. So she has already begun this deception. Now it is Jacob who presents what might be a problem with Rebekah's story. Verse 11, Jacob says to Rebekah, his mother, but my brother Esau is a hairy man, and I'm a man with smooth skin. What if my father touches me? Just one of the many ways they could have got caught. But I would appear to be tricking him and would bring down a curse on myself rather than a blessing. And so Jacob presents the problem with this whole plan is if they get caught, it's going to for sure close the door for this blessing. And I think it is at this moment that Rebekah leaves God's will. Because I think it's very possible. We've talked about how Isaac is struggling with passing this blessing on to Jacob. He wants it to go to Esau. And he has made it clear that that's what he's about to do. Everyone in the story is well aware that whatever blessing he speaks over whichever child, whether it's Esau or Jacob, is legally binding and irrevocable and just spiritually binding, right? This is intended to be a prophetic statement that would pass on the covenant of God. Everybody in the story is well aware of what's at stake here. God has already declared, and Esau, through his own actions, has sort of eliminated himself as a possibility. But here's Isaac not listening to the Lord and wanting to go ahead on his own power to make something happen by his own will. Rebekah now comes in, and I believe she overheard the conversation because the Lord placed her there. He's given her an opportunity to intersect at this point in time to change direction so that Isaac does pass on the blessing to Jacob. And so we might understand that God might place us in positions that allow us to speak into something, that someone's going down a wrong road, and Lord gives us enough knowledge to go, okay, whoa, stop and think about this and have an opportunity to have that person recognize the mistake that they're making. But here is where she takes a left turn detour. This is where it now becomes the sin. Verse 13, his mother said to him, my son, let the curse fall on me. Just do what I say. Go and get them for me. I think we need to be very careful about the language that we're using and the heart posture that we have. I think the Lord would have opened doors for Rebekah to obtain this blessing in a more direct manner, in a more honorable manner. But it is her heart posture that changes this. Her heart posture says, I don't care if we get caught, I'll take the punishment. But she's not talking about the punishment from Isaac here. She's talking about the punishment from God. She's talking about a curse. And she is putting herself in front of God's will and going, I've figured out a better way than you, God, and we're going to do it my way no matter what. And the language should tweak your brain a bit. It should remind you of the garden. This is the same struggle that Eve went through. Did God really say? Will God do what he said he would do? And Eve, just like Rebekah is doing here, makes a determination to find her own way to receive the blessing outside of what God asked her to do, outside of the righteous living that God asked of her. So she disobeys God. And here, in Rebekah's heart attitude, she's doing the same. She's saying, no matter what you had planned, God, we're doing it my way. And even if it's wrong, I'll take the curse. So that should remind us of that. It should also remind us of the story of Sarah, where Sarah as well was willing to go, did God really say? Will he really do it? I will find my way around this. This is a common trap that many fall into. Rebekah, I believe, takes it a step too far in the sense that although I think Sarah and Eve didn't fully understand the full, the consequences of their decisions, Rebekah here is stating, I understand the consequences. I understand that there is a curse on the line here, and I am willing to take it. This is a step further. And I would suggest that perhaps she has almost spoken this curse over herself in the sense that what she is setting up right now creates the opportunity, the environment that leads to Isaac having to leave home. We're going to see that at the beginning of chapter 28. Isaac will not return before Rebekah passes away, which means this altercation, this communication between mother and son here is one of the last ones they will have. This is a very treacherous road that she is walking down. So I've read through this story so many times looking for where did it stop being God's will. Was it God's will that Rebekah deceived Isaac? Where's God's will in here? God was going to make it happen, but Isaac was determined. Like, where did God come in here? And I think God created a lot of opportunities for Rebekah to do it within his will, but by our evidence from verse 13, we see, oh no, she was definitely acting outside of God's will. She's willing to take the punishment of God in order to achieve what she's planned. This does suggest something a lot deeper going on here than just her wanting to fulfill God's will. There's some pride or something in this story that is leading her to be willing to lay this on the line like this. So regardless, this now convinces Jacob that he can continue on in the plan, that his mother's got his back, right? She will take the whatever curse comes from the Lord because of this action. So verse 14, so he went and got them and brought them to his mother. She prepared some tasty food just the way his father liked. She took the best clothes of Esau, her older son, which she had in the house, and put them on her younger son, Jacob. She also covered his hands and the smooth part of his neck with goat skins, and she handed to her son Jacob the tasty food and the bread she had made. He went to his father and said, my father. Yes, my son, he answered. Who is it? And Jacob said to his father, I am Esau. Lie number 1. Not to mention all the background lies that have gone up to this point. This is the moment where Jacob commits to the lie. I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Please sit up and eat some of my game so that you will give me your blessing. It's almost like lie number 2 there, but anyway, he is looking for the blessing. Verse 20, Isaac asked his son, how did you find it so quickly? Because remember, he sent Esau to go hunt for game, and so that takes longer than going to the pen and grabbing a goat. So Jacob is aware that this was pretty quick. Lie number 2, the Lord your God gave me success, he replied. This is Jacob's lie number 2, and now he's bringing God into it, which is a bit of a twist on things for sure. But I want to point out his wording here. He says to Isaac, the Lord your God gave me success. In fact, this is very similar wording that Jacob uses throughout his life. And it's not actually until I'm going to read you the comment from my NIV Bible. This is consistent with Jacob's language elsewhere. It's not until his safe return from Haran does he speak of the Lord as his own God. Isaac's God is the God who has declared this covenant. Now we saw Abraham have to go through all these tests of faith and recommitment, all these things in his lifetime. And he receives the covenant. Then the covenant gets passed on to Isaac, and although we see Isaac have a few faith sort of tests from the Lord, not as many. But we're going to see in Jacob's life again that this is actually a journey. That Jacob is beginning this journey with God right here. It is not perfect. God understands that. Jacob's faith is not perfect, but God is going to perfect it to make him worthy of the covenant he's going to place over him. At this time, Jacob is not worthy of the covenant God is going to place over him. But we're going to see Jacob go through a lot of tests and trials that are going to prepare him to be ready for the covenant. So at this time, we see Jacob, this is your God. And so that's probably a little bit of why he's okay with going with some of this deception, like his mother has suggested to him. Verse 21, Isaac said to Jacob, "Come near so I can touch you, my son, to know whether you really are my son Esau or not." Verse 22, Jacob went close to his father Isaac, who touched him and said, "The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau." He didn't recognize him, for his hands were hairy like those of his brother Esau. So he blessed him. "Are you really my son Esau?" he asked. "Lie number 3, I am," he replied. And Jacob commits to this lie 3 times to deceive his father. And we've learned a lot about Jacob in these few chapters as well. And we probably have come to the conclusion that he's a liar, he's a cheat, he's manipulative, all of these things. Absolutely true. I want you also to recognize the depths and the lengths that Jacob is willing to go to receive the covenant blessing from his father. Esau, who has run from it his entire life, and in fact closed so many doors to this, is in direct contrast to Jacob, who is fighting tooth and nail to receive this covenant. I believe that is the passion that God was looking for. That is the passion that he saw ahead of time in Jacob, and that he was willing to, hey, he's going to get it wrong 1,000,000 times more than he's going to get it right, but that's the passion that I want. I want someone willing to give everything to receive the covenant blessing from me. Now, when I look at my own life, I definitely see that my walk with God has changed over many, many years. And the mistakes that I made early in my Christian walk, it embarrass me now. They do. They really do. My understanding of who God was, what that meant for my life, what sin was really a problem, judging others, all of these things were my imperfect personality, the sinful side of me. And when I came into salvation, that doesn't disappear. That happens through sanctification. That happens through the Holy Spirit meeting me along the road and changing my heart over time and going and testing me in these faith trials, just like he's going to do with Jacob, until he molds me into the person who is worthy of the blessing that he spoke over my life decades ago. So I want to encourage you that we all go through this journey. Although we are looking at Isaac's life from top down, understand that we all enter into this covenant promise with God, and we as Christians call it our salvation moment, this time when we submit that Jesus is Lord, we're going to fall under his covenant. That when we do that, we are this imperfect person who gets a lot of things wrong. And it is only through sanctification, through this process of the Holy Spirit meeting us along the journey and showing us things about God, that we begin to change into the person that we need to be. So we can understand that that's what's going to happen in Jacob's life. I just want you to be able to see it in your own. To be able to understand that God's not finished with you. God is on a process journey with you to take you to the person who is worthy of the covenant he's spoken over you. We often are blind to our own sins. We've seen that in the record already. There are sins that God overlooks, not because they're not wrong, but because what the lesson he's trying to give right now, it's not that one. And I can't hit you with 40 sins right now. I want to deal with one. And so God is not dealing with Jacob's sin here, but he will. He absolutely will. He's going to teach Jacob a lot of lessons about lying and deception and those types of things. But we're going to see that progress over his lifetime and see that in yours. So if you're at this place where you're like, God, I just don't really feel like I'm doing my best job. I don't think I'm getting this right. Especially, hey, all you mamas out there, don't we do this to ourselves all the time? I am getting this wrong. I am screwing this up. I am screwing up my kids. I had a bad temper today. I snapped at them. And you are pouring all these sins on yourself and going, I am not worthy of this, what God has given me. But I want to reassure you that God understands where you are right now. And he can speak a covenant over you right now, even in your unsanctified space that you're at. He can speak a covenant over you that he's going to make happen based on your passion for him, not on your perfection. And so that's what we need to pull out of the story from Jacob. It is his passion for this covenant promise that the Lord is willing to overlook the deception for and still give it to him. Verse 25, then he said, my son, bring me some of your game to eat so I may give you my blessing. So Jacob brought it to him and he ate, brought him some wine and he drank. And then his father Isaac said to him, come here, my son, and kiss me. So he went to him and kissed him. And when Isaac caught the smell of his clothes, he blessed him. And he said, and here comes the covenant promise. Now, Isaac doesn't go all out here. Now, whether that's because he is still unsure that this is Esau, I think probably more likely the reason he's a little hesitant in his language is because he believes this to be Esau, and he is aware Esau is not worthy of this covenant. This is where we get some of this sort of muddied down language. So here, let's get into it. Oh, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field that the Lord has blessed. May God give you of heaven's dew and of the earth's richness, an abundance of grain and new wine. May nations serve you and people bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may the sons of your mother bow down to you. May those who curse you be cursed, and those who bless you be blessed. Isaac does not go into specifically talking about the covenant promise or talking about your children will be as grains of sand, right? This has been spoken over Abraham, it's spoken over Isaac, and Isaac is not as direct on this blessing as he could have been. And I think that's because, it's possible he's not convinced that this is Esau, but I think more than likely he is convinced it's Esau, but he's not convinced Esau is worthy of it. And so he's a little hesitant in his wording. Verse 30. After Isaac finished blessing him and Jacob scarcely left his father's presence, his brother Esau came in from hunting. He too prepared some tasty food and brought it to his father. And then he said to him, my father, sit up and eat some of this game so you can give me your blessing. His father Isaac asked him, how are you? I am your son, he answered, your firstborn Esau. And verse 33, Isaac trembled violently. All of this now starts to fall into place for Isaac. And perhaps he is angry. I think that's possible. But I want to read to you from Ellicott's. Isaac trembled. This was not from mere vexation at having been deceived and made to give the blessing contrary to his wishes. What Isaac felt was that he had been resisting God. In spite of the prophecy given to the mother and Esau's own irreligious character and heathen marriages, he had determined to bestow on him the birthright by act of his own will, and he had failed. But he persists no longer in the sin and acknowledges the divine purpose, and he has no word of blame for Rebekah and Jacob, but confirms to Jacob the possession of his birthright. Isaac now comes face to face with the sin of having gone against what he knew God's will was, and being able to see that God found a way to still make the blessing fall on Jacob. Isaac trembles in fear of the Lord, and we should all. Oh my gosh, I think we are all prone to this sin of wanting to make things happen in our own way. And there are those times when God kind of comes in and goes, no, I'm still going to make it happen the way I want. And you have that moment where it's like, yeah, that's right, God. I knew this is what you wanted and I went against your will. And we should all tremble in those moments when we realize we have defied the Creator. We have defied the King of Kings. We have tried to make our own way instead of his way. We should tremble, and Isaac does. And remember, this would have been a legally binding agreement, but that Jacob's faith in God understands that it's spiritually binding. He will not go back on this. That doesn't, however, change his heart into one of joy. He is still a little miffed that he got deceived, and we're going to see that next. Verse 34, when Esau heard his father's words, he burst out in a loud and bitter cry. I don't know, that verse just shouts 2-year-old temper tantrum. But anyway, especially for a covenant that Esau didn't really want that badly. But anyway, he burst out in a loud and bitter cry and said to his father, bless me too, my father. Isaac said to him, your brother came deceitfully and took your blessing. He took it. So Isaac is not, this perfect person either. And he's a little miffed that this came about this way. Although he understands that it was God's will and he's not going to go back on it, that doesn't change the fact that he's a little miffed. But I think it's interesting that he took your blessing. Esau now picks up on the language and he continues. Esau said, isn't he rightly named Jacob? He's deceived me these 2 times. He took my birthright and now he's taken my blessing. Which perhaps he did take the blessing. However, Esau gave up the birthright, which negated his right to the blessing as firstborn. So we've got 2 men here who are having their own little pity party here about how it came about. And Esau's anger about this is going to boil over into something very dark. Then he asked, haven't you reserved any blessing for me? Verse 37, Isaac answered Esau, I have made him lord over you and have made all his relatives his servants. I've sustained him with grain and new wine. So what can I possibly do for you, my son? And Esau said to his father, do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me too, my father. And Esau wept out loud. His father Isaac answered him. Now this is Isaac being a little timid again about the blessing. He has, in the back of his mind, he's realized he has gone against what God declared. And he didn't really go all in on the blessing for Jacob. Now he's got to figure out a way to appease his older son. And again, he does it in this really wishy-washy way. Your dwelling will be away from the earth's riches, away from the dew of heaven above. This actually becomes prophetic because Esau ends up moving away and settling in the area of Edom. Now, Edom is like a mountain area. It's very sterile. And so it doesn't have the rich grain and wine and vineyards that the promised land has. And so that first part definitely becomes prophetic. And because of that, because this land doesn't offer up all these opportunities to feed yourself and provide for income, he needs to find other ways to provide income for himself. And this is how he goes about doing. Verse 40, you will live by the sword, and you will serve your brother. And when you grow restless, you will throw his yoke from off your neck. So those things definitely do become very prophetic. But this battle between Esau and Jacob is a generational battle that never gets resolved because the issues behind it never get resolved. And so we see the Israelites and the Edomites bitterly fighting over land and authority for generations, literally thousands and thousands of generations, and in many ways still continue the battle today. Verse 41, Esau held a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing his father had given him, and he said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are near, and then I will kill my brother Jacob. And we have the sin of Eve. Continuing on down, we now have the same sin of Cain and Abel. Cain, just as in the story of Cain, where Cain lets this murderous intent idea settle in his heart over jealousy over his brother, we've got the exact same issue happening here. And Esau has now let this murderous intent settle in his heart over his anger and jealousy over his brother. I think the parallels for Cain and Jacob are there as well, because Cain understood what God was looking for. And here we've got Jacob, although we see him doing it in a lot of wrong ways, has this passion to seize the covenant of what God is doing, of what God has spoken over this family. Jacob holds on to it dearly. So he understands, although imperfectly, he understands what the Lord is looking for. And so I can see the parallels for them as well. So we've got this sin of Eve bubbling up again in Rebekah, and it flows over into her children. We've got another Cain and Abel situation happening here. However, Rebekah becomes aware of this. It never ceases to amaze me how my children think they hide their heart or how they're feeling from me, when in so many ways I can see it plainly on their face. And the verse says, he says to himself, but Rebekah knows right away. She can see, she knows her babies, she knows her sons, and she's well aware of what is bubbling inside of Esau. She can see it on his face. When Rebekah was told what her younger son Esau had said, she sent for her younger son Jacob and said to him, your brother Esau is consoling himself with the thought of killing you. Now then, my son, do what I say. Flee at once to my brother Laban in Haran and stay with him for a while until your brother's fury subsides. And when your brother is no longer angry and forgets what you did, I will send word for you to come back from here. Why should I lose both of you in one day? I think Rebekah very much thinks if Jacob just leaves for a couple of months, he can come home. But she's so wrong. What she has set up between her two sons goes so much deeper than that, and she will not be able to repair that rift in her lifetime. She now needs to convince Isaac that Jacob needs to leave. Now, whether she gets into that whole story with him or not, it doesn't really tell us, but she comes up with a reason for him leaving. Rebekah then said to Isaac, I am disgusted with living because of these Hittite women. These are the women who are married to Esau, who are obviously in her circle. If Jacob takes a wife from among the women of this land, from a Hittite woman like these, my life will not be worth living. And so she goes back to Isaac and says, we have to send him away because he can't get married here. She does not, now that the covenant has been passed on to Jacob, she can't allow him to marry into a line that is not going to be blessed by God. Rebekah understands this, although we see her sin in trying to make this happen. Rebekah understands the covenant a lot more clearly than even Isaac does. But that is chapter 27. I hope that there were some insights here that you learned about God's will, how he can speak a covenant over you when you aren't really worthy of it yet, but then craft your life in such a way that you begin to learn the lessons for how to live the covenant that he has spoken over you. Also, that again, just like is in the last couple chapters, we have some excellent examples of understanding that sin that is not arrested and addressed becomes passed on to our children. Our children then carry that sin and have to deal with it. And so I encourage you as mothers that this is something we have control over. We absolutely have control over the spiritual battles that our children will engage in by dealing with our own struggles in faith. And it doesn't matter. Keep in mind God's power and willingness to call you into covenant before you were ready. So for me, I didn't come to the Lord till my children were a little bit older. Like my youngest was 7 when I came to the Lord. So I spent a lot of time looking back at their prior years and going, God, I screwed this up. There's no way I can bring enough knowledge into their lives that they can know God at such a deep level, because I've already messed it up, you know. And yeah, and I can tell you, the first few years that I was a Christian, I got a lot of things wrong. I got a lot of things wrong and taught those things to my children. Don't we cringe sometimes when we think about the things that we've spoken to our children about? But I want to reassure you that even if your children are older now, even if your children are having children and there's a new generation coming up, if you go to the Lord and sincerely deal with him on the sins and the struggles that have followed you and your family, so we would call them, if you're familiar with the term, a generational curse. So something that, you know, was evident in your great-grandparents' lives, your parents' lives, your lives, you know, it continues. You see it generationally falling for this sin that repeats itself, you know, whether it's poverty or it's abuse or it's divorce or addiction, whatever it is, you look back and you can see that sin following through. I promise you today, if you deal with that sin, if you go to the Lord and you deal with that sin in your life, God will help your children deal with that sin in a much easier way than you'd had to. You will break curses that will no longer have power over them, and they will fight those battles at a different level than you did. And I'm not telling you that out of this place of, I think maybe that's what the Bible says. I know the Bible says it. I'm telling you out of this place that I've lived it. I came to Christ when my kids were so little, and struggled as a new Christian, learning what God was trying to tell me in his word and learning the best that I could. But in the meantime, my kids hit their teens and they had all these questions and doubts, and I was seeing them slip further and farther away. But I began to learn about this idea of a generational curse, this idea of a sin that a difficulty that gets passed down, you know, whether it's addiction or it's abuse or poverty or divorce, but it's something that I look back in my family's line and I see it. I began to earnestly pray to the Lord, don't let this be visited upon my children. This is the step that Rebekah missed. The step that Isaac missed was that they didn't begin to pray in God's will that the curses that followed them would not be passed on to their children. They began to pray actively against these things. And I can tell you that my kids are now in their 30s and they are so much farther along on the journey than I was at their age. They are so much stronger in their relationships, in their health, in their recognition of what's going on around them. They are so much further down the road than I was. And you've heard me talk about this, of me praying into my kids' floor being my ceiling. As far as I can take this, I am going to pray and ask God to redeem my family from these mistakes and these sins that have plagued my family line so that my children don't experience them. And I want to encourage you that no matter where you are in this line right now, whether your babies are little, whether they are teenagers, whether they are young adults, or they are parents, you can begin to pray into this journey, and God can begin to redeem. He can take your children through a massive spiritual growth that is only possible because you are connecting with God and asking forgiveness and breaking generational curses. So I want to encourage you to actively pray for a breaking of these curses, a breaking of these sins, a redeeming for your children, that their floor is your ceiling. So you just keep pushing higher and higher and higher. God, I want to take these blessings as high as I can go. I want to take my spiritual walk with you as deep as I can go so that my children can begin from there. And I promise you, God can redeem your family wherever you are at right now. So, big topic. We've covered a few chapters now that talk about this idea of sin getting passed down, or seeing this reflection in these families, that they're dealing with the same things over and over again. And we can begin to pray actively that our family begins to start anew, be redeemed, and follow a new path, follow a new destiny. That sounds kind of corny. Anyway, that's a big topic. If you want me to go into greater detail, just let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to pray us out as we go, because I want you to just fully submit to the idea that God can bless and redeem your family wherever you are right now. Father God, I just thank you for today. I thank you for your wisdom from your word. I just ask that you would go with the parents that are listening, Lord, that you would teach them how to dig deep, how to face the issues that are in their families, that they might begin to pray intensely to break generational curses, to break the chains that have bound their families, and they can begin to redeem their children in your name. I pray that you would go with each family and offer them the support and wisdom and provision that they need this week. And I pray all this in Jesus' blessed name. God bless.